Well, hey there team, welcome back to the channel, welcome to something a little bit different. Today we're going to have a talk about Octopath Traveller, which I've put like 5 hours into the past couple of days. I'm really enjoying it, but it's obviously not a brand new game. It's not super contemporary. Arguably, this is something that should probably be on my second channel. But you know, I got a little bit of preamble I wanted to discuss and I thought I'd put it on the main channel. But yeah, this is an older game that I put a lot more time into. I played a little bit of it back on the Nintendo Switch way whenever that was, when that came out years and years ago. But I picked this up on deep sale because Octopath Traveller 0 is just around the corner. And I'm actually seriously considering reviewing it because I do like JRPGs and I need to make more time for them. I know they don't exactly go gangbusters on this channel, but they are one of the last bastions of the AAA gaming space that have kind of never really lost a step. Like in this, for example, the soundtrack, the gameplay, the writing, even the voice acting, you know, I don't really like Western voice actors that much, but all of this is just wonderful. It's been such a holiday for me to just go down the rabbit hole in this. And it works as a good bridging video because come December summer, I'm actually going to be bringing back some longer form videos. You know, the whole give them an 18-hour shot because that's the average amount of time to beat. I've started mapping out my year, and not to give the game away, but for those that miss what essentially the worth your time, worth your money format was built upon, which were, you know, deeper looks at the games, pretty much reviews, if we're being honest, as opposed to surface level, you know, where I can miss stuff beyond the first impression. Apologies for the front load, but it had to go somewhere. Anyway, Octopath Traveller. This is an ongoing series. It's a Square Enix series. There is 1 and 2, which I've played a little bit of both. And 0 is about to come out, and that looks like it's changing up the formula yet again. You have to rebuild a village, so it's sort of got a bit of a weird soft colony builder component to it. I'm curious how that's going to work. But this is the original, and there are a few tent poles that make it what it is. One is this perspective and art style, which at the time was incredibly unique. It still kind of is, though it's been aped a little bit by some other games. But as far as I don't know what you want to call it, an attempt to bring the traditional flat, top-down pixel art JRPG style of, you know, the Super NES era into a, you know, more forward, more modernized styling. This is probably the best attempt. And it's not just a gimmick, because there is that 2.5D component, that loose term that gets thrown around. You know, much of the level layout is ducking in behind little alcoves. It's not going to twist your brain or anything like that, but it does engage you at that sort of low level, and it's kind of comfortable. The idea that you'll see a chest and you can automatically abstract, oh, maybe if I double back and I go around behind this pillar, I'll get to that chest. It doesn't get much more deep than that. But if anything, it marries the, you know, the art style and positioning of the camera together in a, you know, cleaner, more than just an aesthetic kind of way. There's a function to it, albeit, you know, pretty soft. But the art's still so beautiful. I talk about this all the time. If you want to make timeless art, you have to step away from hyper-realism. Stylized, right? And this technically came out in 2019, at least on Steam, right? That makes it many, many years old. But even the water effects and all that, it's very beautiful. So I'm kind of smitten with that. But that was a new kid on the block kind of art style when it came out, and now it's a staple of the series, and it gets aped by other games. The other, you know, key component to this is the Octopath layer. Now, look, it's been forever since I touched 2. I can't really speak on 2. I probably did a 30-minute overview and that's it, tragically. The nature of a lot of my format over the years has limited me from really going deep on JRPGs, which is tragic because it's something I traditionally have enjoyed as a gamer. That's, you know, not to get off track again, but that's why I'm bringing deeper reviews back, because when I do invest the time, I'm generally much happier with the outcome. Even this little fleeting holiday of 5 hours. So far, I'm going to play more of it this week before we go into reviews proper. But, you know, this just blocking out some time to kind of go hard in the paint on a game has been wonderful, honestly. But to get back to the Octopath component, the gimmick, right? There are literally 8 paths, right? 8 travelers, whatever you want to call them, 8 origins. You pick one. I suppose that you could argue that's probably the most dangerous or tricky part, is picking the right one to get you going, because they're all quite different, but they all are quite tropey of the adventurer setting out on an adventure for various motivations. Some darker, some brighter. And just to jump forward, once you've done your character's initial prologue, let's say, where they set them up and off they go on high adventure into the open world, you are given little map markers of where they're expected to go next for their story, but it'll be radically, they'll be level 3 or something, and the next step is level 22. So you can see on the other side of the world map where you're going to worm your way toward. But along the way, it's marked out all the different origins that you can go and pick up. So there is a soft open world component to it, which isn't really something that's super JRPG. Now, obviously I'm generalizing, but usually it's still fairly linear, even with an open world setting. So this has a little bit more than most in that, you can choose a left or a right path. Maybe I'm going to pick up this dude along the way. And ultimately, as you go along and you encounter other origin heroes' stories, you get to have a timeout for, half an hour or whatever, where you go back and you actually play their origin and you get their backstory, and then your party bands together and ultimately you help them finish their initial story, right? They might be off to fight a villain in a cave nearby, so you don't spend too long doing the prologue before it sort of half morphs the back half of that character's prologue in with your current party. And it's actually really, really clever as an unusual way of framing narratives within the video game space. And this is something I muse about often, and it's very difficult to give good examples of. So this stands as a great example of unconventional storytelling against the traditional Hollywood narrative convention, which is to say, example, I don't love the Game Awards, how they just pat all the AAA cinematic gameplay experiences on the back, right? They might be a great effort and they look like $1 million and the gameplay loop's okay, but a lot of it is imitating Hollywood. The Game Awards themselves are imitating the Academy Awards, and I find all that so reductive. Because games as a medium, by definition, are more than cinema. Not to take away from cinema, I'm a huge cinephile. I love watching movies, but it is a screen that you sit there and look at, and a video game is objectively more and can be more. And what I'm trying to unpack and get at is that who says that narrative constraints of the big screen have to apply to a video game? And so here we have what you would probably call, by convention, unconventional or even poor pacing. As you start an origin, you go around, you travel into a new town, you stop, you play through that person's origin, you marry them into your party, you go along. Like, by the time I'm done with it, I'm guessing my game's going to have 8 prologues, right? Where I capture all these people because I want to. I'm going out of my way at this point to scoop them all up because not one has been a misstep. I think I've seen 4 now as of this morning, and each and every one of them is really interesting. And I don't know if I'm the only one that feels this way about narrative in general, because I find myself at odds against, say, the Lord of the Rings fan base, at least when it comes to the movies, right? I think by a country mile, the best of the 3 Lord of the Rings movies is The Fellowship of the Ring, is the origin, is seeing the Shire and the dinky sort of Hobbit music and reminiscing about how they just like sitting around and all that, and then they have to fish out of water and go along, and then Boromir to tie it all together at the end. Oh my God, it hurts me just even thinking about it. But like, I will watch that first movie on repeat. I love it. I think it's perfect structure, and it's the most important part, the building and breaking of the Fellowship, the origin of everything. Now I'm getting a little bit sidetracked, but that's kind of the point of these deeper, longer form videos, is to allow me a little bit of latitude. However, as far as I can understand from every person I've ever really encountered, they all love the 3rd movie the best because that's got the big bombastic fight set pieces and all that. And not to take away from the 3rd, I actually personally think Helm's Deep and all that's much better. But I guess my point is I have a fixation on beginnings and origins and motivations, and that's the most important thing for me in a narrative space, whereas tying it all together for a happy ending doesn't really matter so much to me. Anyway, the point of that aside is this game has lent into exactly what appeals to me, is just origins and origins and origins. And from that, to me, that becomes the foundational building blocks of what you would call my investment, right? I now have 4 characters in my parties, and they have all sorts of different motivations for hitting the open road. Like, my first character is this girl that's a merchant, right? And arguably she has the most cheery, basic origin. She's literally the daughter of a pair of merchant people that run a shop in their town, and a trade ship comes along, and she just has an eye for bargains and that sort of thing. And temporarily, she saves the town from some bandits, stealing all their goods, but she uses her wit to get around it. Makes friends with a merchant of the high seas. We might cross paths again, but she wants to go out there and stake her claim. Like, it's not built on trauma or tragedy. It's just high adventure manifest, which really resonated with me and got me in the JRPG spirit. But then you go along, and the next town that I went down through the south, and I came across this warrior dude, and he has a much more traditional, old man soldier. He's like a super soldier from the Royal Bodyguard. He's kind of got a Ronin quest line, was betrayed by his best mate, other warrior. Now he doesn't have a king to serve. He's kind of in hiding, just helping this little township. Trouble comes to the town. He saves the little surrogate son boy that looks up to him. Stereotypes, I don't care, whatever. It's well done. And now he wants to go out and find out what happened to this other dude that betrayed him, because he's got a lead. So you team up and you have like cause. The third one was kind of really tragic. I found this dancer lady in like the deep southern desert. And that's the other thing, the way that I'm moving through this world and through the different biomes to talk about Lord of the Rings, especially Fellowship of the Rings again. It is channeling those moments that really shook me, where, you would have the flying, panning video of them going over the snowy mountains or the wending open fields, It conveys a strong feel of not just locomotion, but worldly travel. And that adds depth to the experience. It's not that I've just been playing the game for hours, it's that we have traversed the globe. And that kind of makes the bond deeper. But anyway, I went down to this desert pleasure city, and this girl is like a dancer, right? It's as close to as a sex worker type thing that Square Enix and JRPGs with their gentle touch are really going to go for. So it's kind of surprisingly dark for what you'd expect. But she's on the hunt for these dudes marked with crow marks or something like that assassinated her father, and she's got this fixation. She'll suffer whatever indignity that she has to avenge her father. So she's basically following up a lead that's led her into this lifestyle, and, the lead continues beyond. And then this most recent one that I picked up this morning is like a cleric, apothecary dude that comes up with concoctions and that, and he's trying to help a girl that's, bit by a viper, and they're trying to get a cure. And that's kind of where I'm at the moment, the 4 of us traveling into this viper's den, quite literally. So yeah, the pacing is unusual, but you can hear it in the enthusiasm and in the energy of my voice. It is just really arresting. And I suppose on paper, an elevator pitch, the idea of restarting for each character could be a detractor, right? It could be a negative element, but it's really quick. It's not more than half an hour where you're depowered back to the one character. The way that the curve, the exponential, leveling up of XP works in this game means that, Tail End Charlie, the lowest level dude, like my apothecary, he's already catching up super fast, right? So he's not out leveled. However, they're tweaking the numbers in the background. It's really something where you can pick up this level 1 character, but he's only level 1 for about 15 minutes, and then he's pretty much caught up to the team. But yeah, just the quality of the writing, the fact that they keep it fairly brief before they put you back in as a party. It really is building out this ensemble cast. And while my first chick, Tessa or whatever her name is, the merchant, is, still my main character, my first in the lineup, gets the first pick of the gear and my most attention, it is truly building out an ensemble fellowship that are more than just side characters in a Dragon Age, not to take shots or anything like that. They're not just a vending machine to give me 3 choices to choose from. In fact, there is no interplay between the characters, right? You play your origin, they fold into the party, and that's it. Off goes the game. So somehow, with actually less narrative interplay between the characters, they have still made this ensemble bonded cast, and I suppose the bonding agent, the glue that holds it all together, is me at the center of all the spokes on the wheel, enjoying all of their origins and what brings them together. And then look, beyond that, I haven't even talked about the gameplay. On one hand, it is standard fare for like a JRPG type game. It's also doing a couple of little gimmicks which I think are wonderful, and they lean into these unique, unusual professions. Like, granted, we've got like a traditional warrior in amongst them, but like I said, one's a merchant, one's a dancer, which is sort of a job styling that comes up in Asian fantasy, but it's still unusual. It's not what you would call like a frontline Holy Trinity class. And then, got this sort of apothecary, not cleric, but just a medicine man in times of where medicine is still kind of skeptical. They all have little gameplay gimmicks that make them really interesting, and I use all of them as well. There's nothing really falling by the wayside. But having said all of that, I would also say, if you've made it this far and maybe you're a fan of the channel and you're just happy to hear me talk about something, but you're not a JRPG fan, this is a really good baby's first JRPG. If you've never taken the dive, but you're thinking about it, if I've got you right now in this sentence curious about dipping your toe, you should tab out and pick this up while it's on deep sale. It's worth it, and this could be the first JRPG that you actually play that really on-ramps you into an absolutely wonderful, wholesome, giant part of the gaming industry that I still think a lot of Western gamers will not touch for whatever preconception or ideas that they have. Some of the deepest bonds and emotional moments and most rewarding gameplay I've ever had have come from JRPGs. And, even though I don't talk about it that much, and arguably contemporaneously I don't play them quite as much, and I'm going to change that, I still have a rich history with them. Grandia 2 might be my favorite JRPG of all time, back on the bloody Dreamcast. But you can play that on Steam as well. Get that as well, sight unseen. Anyway, my point is, I have enough of a background to at least tell you what is and isn't easy to grasp, and this has some really interesting gimmicks that would on-ramp you if you'd never played a turn-based JRPG game ever before. So ultimately, the way that it works is that you attack with your characters from basic attacks, and they all generally have multiple weapon slots or types or what have you. The beauty as well is there is an optimized gear option, which you see in some of these games because they can become quite overwhelming and fiddly, and arguably, unless you're trying to min-max a very hard dungeon at the end game, it doesn't matter too much how much you eke out the optimization. So you can just go to the character equipment screen and go optimize this character, and it will just auto-equip the best gear in slot that you have available for them. And you just optimize all your dudes pretty much in pecking order. My merchant goes first. So they'll have a bunch of different weapons. The merchant girl has a bow and a spear at the moment, but I think I could probably give her more. And you also have some skills, right? And they'll be spells, like she casts wind spells, wind magic, and I've got some dark and some ice, the different sects. And then they'll have like their own gimmicks and skills and jobs. And in her case, she can steal money, which is crazy because, that's kind of a thief class. And usually in, Final Fantasies, JRPGs, I just don't go near any of that crap ever. But I find myself actively playing around this merchant skill because it has a percentage chance that seems to scale against their HP. So it's a bit Pokemon-like, if you beat them up enough to lower their HP low enough, her chance goes towards 100% of being able to loot money off of them. So that's, the main thing that I'll do with her. But before I get away from it, the core idea of the loop is that the enemy underneath their health bar, they will have a shield with a number in it, a number of sort of resistance, vulnerability parts, and they'll also have a bunch of question marks that as you discover them, they are the weaknesses, whether it's a weapon type, whether it's a spell type. And so that's why you have multiple weapons. So, you poke and you prod, and it is that minor loop that you get in a lot of JRPGs where it's about intel gathering and putting it in that lexicon of understanding of what elemental weaknesses, or in this case, weapon weaknesses they have. And, you hit them enough times, it will put them into a break stun state. So there is this mini game or meta game, depending how you want to look at it, where you're trying to figure out the weaknesses of all these different creatures and opponents that you come up against so as to stun state them more easily. On top of that, you have this, I don't know what it's called, an overcharge mechanic, where you can generate pips. You know, it's not quite an EX bar, it's not quite mana, but it does build over turns, and you can over-invest charges into your attack, which creates a fascinating strategic loop. So say you're versing a bumblebee monster and you know that it's got spear weakness, and my girl's got spear, and say he's got 2 shield, right? So 2 before vulnerability break. I can over-invest in my attack if I've got the pips. For the girl, I pick the spear, I press the right bumper a couple of times until it says 2 by attack. I hit them, and it'll go 1-2. It'll jam multiple attacks in and shield break and put them in a vulnerable state. And then, you know, it's multiple jabs with a weapon. So like if I overcharge it 5 times, they'll do 5 attacks, which might have advantages depending on buffs that you have. But then if you were to use like, oh, I don't know, a dark spell and you overcharge that 5 times, it's actually only 1 hit, but it's 5 times stronger. So you probably want to break something's vulnerability, stun state it, then hit it with an overcharged spell. So there's all these complexity layers and synergies that start to emerge out of a very basic concept, and it's just really well done. And look, I could go on forever, and I'm already going on, but again, that's the spirit of this video and what we're warming up for next week. But like, each of the characters have their own little gimmicks as well, and they go beyond combat. You know, the merchant girl can actually barter with random people in the street and they'll sell me items, right? The warrior can challenge people to a duel. I can go through a city and just beat everyone to death, and they're like, hey, good fight, thank you. And he gets over leveled, which is good because he's kind of my team's tank, right? You know, the dancer can seduce people. You can get a random... I had this old lady from some random village follow me out into my desert, and you can summon her into the fight, you know? Or even the apothecary so far. It looks like he can mix concoctions. You collect ingredients and consumables along the way, and he can mix 2 together to make essentially a powerful spell. It could heal the whole party. It could electrocute an enemy. You just have to trial and error it. Anyway, I'm halfway through the starting characters. I'm sure I'm not even remotely close to ending this game. I'm having an absolute gay old time. I've come across some dungeons along the way which are way too high for my level and absolutely wipe me immediately. So there is endgame content in there as well, which I'm very excited to check out. Anyway, all in all, I just wanted to take the time to play a bit of this, and I really enjoyed it, and I wanted to share that experience was wonderful. If you made it this far, I implore you to check this out yourself if you haven't already. Also, any feedback around my format would be welcome. I do miss doing these deeper dives, and the plan is for the next year to potentially bring these back. Deeper, more introspective looks. That's not to say we're going to give up on the surface level content as well. We will find a balance. But, you know, for my own sanity's sake and my general happiness gaming, this has been the happiest couple of days that I've had in gaming in a little while. You know, it is a very first world problem, I understand that, but there is something, and I've lamented it for many years, that if I'm looking at the first couple of hours of a game every day ad infinitum and never really completing any games, I'm only becoming an expert at tutorials, right? And my surface level intro becomes surface level in and of itself. The game may well be more beyond the first hour, beyond a terrible impression perhaps. But yeah, ultimately I do feel that pang as someone that, compare it to reading books. I want to complete full books to get the entire experience. I don't want to just review the first 2 chapters forever. I need to find a balance. And the hope is that this is it. Anyway, thank you for listening this far to my video and indulging me. Again, I don't expect it to do super well because JRPGs just don't go that hot with this particular audience that I've created. But never know, maybe we can move that needle a little bit. Anyway, team, this is my sort of soft, maybe kind of review of Octopath Traveller and how it's been a wonderful experience, and I recommend it to anyone, especially people that aren't so hot on JRPGs. Team, might just leave it there for the time being, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.